we are past the halfway point in the Lord's time. We started Lent, and we're going to journey through that Easter, and it ends in Pentecost in June, which that is coming. I don't know, but I like having the "You Are Here" marker to kind of just follow where we are on the calendar. That's been helpful for me to kind of keep track of where things are. I hope it's been helpful for you that you can kind of see where we are on the calendar of things. Now, in the liturgical calendar, it repeats every year, but there's year A, B, and C, and there are different scriptures that go with it, so that repeats every fourth year. There is kind of a repeat, but by the time you get to 4 years, you kind of changed in the last 3 years, so then you're looking at that with new light. So it's kind of like our holiday seasons that we keep. You know, we have Christmas and all those things, and Christmas never gets old, I'll tell you that. So these are the repetitive things that we learn, the patterns of how Jesus lived for half a year, and then we learn how to apply it into the way that we live on the other half of the year. So Lent kind of is 40 days long. If you take off the Sundays, it lasts 40 days and brings us right up close to the Holy Week moment. And it kind of is 40 days because Jesus wandered for 40 days in the wilderness. And this is a good reminder for us that Jesus was fully human. As much as he was God, he was human. And he had hardship and difficulty and temptations and trials and all the things that we experience as humans, Christ experienced as well. So Lent is a good reminder of that he walked 40 days in the desert and was tempted. And Lent is traditionally a season of fasting. One year, it was a bad idea, but one year I gave up coffee for Lent. And I tell you, that was a rough year. And I remember I gave it up all the way until Easter morning. I was going to be a super Christian. And that first Sunday, after 40-some days plus without having coffee, I was a little bit amped when I came to church because it was the first coffee in like 2 months. And so it's known for you're going to fast something, you're going to give up something and all that. And we don't really like giving up stuff as a culture. I don't know about you. I don't really like giving up stuff as a culture. So there's different ways that we can actually participate in it. But what it's supposed to kind of hone in on is hunger. Human hunger. I don't like to feel hungry. I don't know about you. I don't feel hungry until nighttime. And then I eat everything. And it's just like, okay, I'm going to empty out this cupboard. I'm going to eat this entire bag of potato chips, right? Like, hunger is something that I really feel. But have you ever made the mistake of going grocery shopping when you're hungry? Yeah. If you compare the bill, the grocery bill, of shopping when you're hungry to the bill of shopping when, you've really got an eye on your budget and all that kind of stuff, there's a big difference. There's a big difference, especially when you go to Costco and you're like, wow, I can get, like a 5-gallon barrel of mayonnaise here, and it's going to be great. Save me lots of money kind of a thing. They don't ask you where you're going to store it, though. But when you're hungry, you kind of buy everything. You eat everything. You grab everything. And what hunger does, if you really look at it, hunger sparks action. If you feel hungry, you're going to do something about it. Not all the time is it a good action. Like when I ate an entire bag of potato chips a couple weeks ago in the evening. Bad idea. But my hunger led to an action. So, deprivation causes hunger. I need food. Now I'm hungry. The appetite's sparking. And then hunger sparks an urge. I need to do something about the hunger. Go to the cabinet, get the bag of chips, and then urges lead to action. Eat an entire bag of chips. I said family size, so I guess I'm a family. In myself, I was able to eat the entire bag of chips. That's what hunger does. So you look at hunger, deprivation causes the hunger, and then the hunger sparks an urge, and the urge leads to action. And what Lent does, Lent actually gets you to look at your process of hunger to action and say, what is it that I am feeling that sparks this, that leads to this? Instead of just looking at actions and just saying, well, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why does this happen? It digs a little bit deeper into the actual hunger. So the purpose of Lent, the purpose of fasting, is to actually manufacture hunger for the purpose of reflection. That's a really interesting way to look at it, right? Because hunger, if you look at what when you're hungry, you look at why am I hungry for this? Why do I want to do this? And then when you manufacture the hunger, it gives you a time of self-reflection. Now, Jesus is kind of fasting food for 40 days in the desert, and that causes reflection, because when you manufacture that hunger, then you can kind of follow the bunny trails and say, I'm feeling this, I want to do this about it, and it's going to lead to this action. But you can, instead of just do the action and then question it later, you can kind of travel all the way up the pathway to the fountainhead of the hunger itself. And Lent is a time of giving something up to manufacture hunger so that you can kind of reflect on your process of how you get to action from hunger. So there's a couple ways to do it. You can do deprivation, which is a subtraction. I'm going to give up coffee or chocolate or, scrolling reels on Facebook or things like that. You can do it that, or you can do it with displacement. I need to start doing something better for me, but it doesn't fit into my life as it is now, so I'm going to have to move something off the shelf to fit this there. I don't know if you've ever bought something really cool, you found it at Goodwill or something, you're like, oh, this is great, where am I going to put it? And then you're looking around your house, where am I going to put it, where am I going to put it? And then you find the spot, but now you got to move something off the shelf. Like fasting can be that. You're going to displace something and then put that in its place. A really interesting thing that I've tried to do this year is stop scrolling the reels on Facebook. They like suck you in. And so I've displaced the reel scrolling on Facebook. And I said, if I find myself scrolling the reels on Facebook, then I have to stop, because this is self-reflection, right? To stop doing that and then start up an episode of The Simpsons. Isn't that interesting? Replacing something that's not great with something a little bit better. See, it doesn't have to be this huge spiritual thing where you're like, I am going to stop doing this and then spend 4 hours in meditation every day, right? You're just displacing something that's probably not great for you with something that'll be better for you. And I can tell you I feel better about myself after 20 minutes of Simpsons than after 40 minutes of scrolling reels on Facebook. So it can be that simple and practical, where you're like, it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to spiritualize everything and say, well, I need to displace this with like Bible reading every day. If you want to do that, that's absolutely great. Nothing wrong with that. It's healthy. But if that's step 5 and you're on step 1, you might only last like 3 days in that process. And so getting there takes time. And you can displace something in your life. Fasting can just be that. I'm going to displace this bad thing with something a little bit better. I'm going to stop eating chips at night and eat pickles instead. I'm doing that for Lent. I know, everyone's like, oh, how'd you do that? I'm just missing the fatty. You get crunchy salty with pickles, but you don't get the fatty, and that's okay. I'm gonna work with it. So I'm displacing things. So you can see how Lent kind of works. You can just flat out give up something and create an empty spot in your life and see what grows in there. That's a way to do it. But you can also just displace something in your life. And it doesn't have to be like uber spiritual Jedi stuff to be like a super Christian kind of a thing. If you want to add in different spiritual practices, you can absolutely do that. But if you're not ready to take on a Bible reading program or a huge prayer undertaking or fasting or meditation or things like that, you can just displace simple things with smaller things and feel the results of getting a little bit better over time. Because you don't want to just overwhelm your system because you're used to doing the things you do, right? We do them because we're used to doing them that way. And they bring a sense of comfort and stability and predictability. And you don't want to just turn over the entire apple cart because that's really hard to put life back together. So what if you just focus on one thing and one healthy thing and just displace it? And so I'm taking on small things that I can handle, like watching The Simpsons and eating pickles. Like that is some of my Lent practices. I'm also starting my meditation routine in the mornings that I allowed to go by the wayside for probably a year. So I'm getting back into just a quiet meditative practice in the morning for a half hour. So I'm also adding that into there as well. But there's different things that we can do. Lent is about hunger and learning our patterns of hunger. Now there's different types of hunger. There's like, I'm hungry, I need to do something about that, right? Hunger types. You feel the rumble in your tummy and you're like, I gotta go to McDonald's, I gotta go to Dairy Den, I gotta eat something right now I have the hunger, and then it triggers something in your brain, and then it leads to action. That's one type of hunger. Very real type of hunger. But then there is also, we feel the hunger to check on Facebook, and then you pull up, and then all of a sudden it's like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, you're like, whoa, where did the time go? I was just like sucked into my phone. That's hunger. Same thing. You felt a hunger, like, am I missing something? Did someone text me? Did someone message me? You pull out your phone, you're sucked in for a good 40 minutes. That's a kind of hunger. There's also a kind of hunger that we feel the hunger to retaliate against somebody who wronged us. So we start plotting revenge. How am I going to get back at them? What am I going to do? How am I going to... That's a hunger. And all of these different kinds of hungers, it's like a pathway. You can look at your desires and your actions and all that. It gets back to the heart of some things. So hunger is like this pathway inside of you. And you have this pathway. There's desire. I want to do this thing and satiate this thing, hunger. And then there's action. Now I'm doing that thing that I planned on doing or thought I was. In between that pathway is some reflection. And you can say, is this the best pathway? Is this the best fulfillment of this hunger? Is this the best way to really take on whatever is this lack is in my life? So when you give something up for Lent, whether it's through displacement or replacement or subtraction or whatever, it causes you to become self-reflective and saying, why do I eat a bag of potato chips at night? Or why do I get sucked into my phone? Or why do I find myself thinking about that person and plotting revenge? Or why do you start asking the questions, and then you start to look at the patterns of the way that you're living your life. And you can say, well, if I pop the hood open on this thing I call my life, can I tweak this and fix that and kind of overhaul this section here and then get a better working vehicle on the other side? That's the purpose of Lent. The purpose of Lent is not just to be a super Christian and fast something and prove to the world that you're great because you gave something up for X amount of days. It's really just to do some self-reflection and modification and like steering of your life and saying, I need to do something different, something better, and something that's more healthy. It's going to lead me to a better destination than if I just remain on my autopilot. You get on autopilot, like you don't really think about why you're doing what you're doing. You just do it because you always have. Lent is a time to look at what are my autopilots that I get stuck in that lead me to places that I didn't necessarily plan on getting here. It's just how things unfolded. And so you get to look at that. So that's what it is. And this story of Jesus in the desert focuses in on 3 temptations. I mean, we can dive into a whole bunch of nerdy stuff we're not going to do today, but we are going to look at the 3 temptations that Jesus had. Turn stones to bread, claim all the kingdoms of the world, and throw yourself off from the pinnacle of the temple. And what these specific temptations meant for Jesus, and then kind of follow the trail back to our life here and say, how am I tempted in these ways? Because these are the 3 temptations that are perennial traditions. They're perennial temptations that all humans face over time. And they're illustrated in Jesus' struggle in the desert with this person called the devil. And your perennials are starting to pop up out of the ground, hopefully, in your gardens where the sun has been shining on them. They come back every year. These are perennial temptations. They come back, they revisit, which is why we got to do Lent every year, because these perennial temptations invade our life over and over and over again. So we're going to look at the first one, and that is turn stones into bread. And here's that passage. Jesus was filled with the Holy Spirit after he got baptized, and he returned from the Jordan. He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days where he was tested by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished, and the devil said to him, if you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread. And Jesus answered him, it is written, one does not live by bread alone. Now, funny story about this verse that has nothing to do with the message today. I was sitting down with a guy at a church years ago, and he was eating this homemade bread that someone said, and he's like, oh man, this is the best bread ever. And he's like, I could live on this stuff. I looked at him and I said, not according to Jesus. And he laughed. He was like, that was a good one. That was one of the best jokes I've ever told in my whole life. So I gotta let you know that it happened, because I didn't put it on Facebook at the time. So have you ever seen your kids, your grandkids, look what I can do? Like this is that desire to prove yourself, that desire to like put yourself to the test and look what I can do, I did it. You know, and little kids, they do that, you know, you climb to the top of the arm of the couch and then they like leap off into your arms, just like, look what I can do, I can fly. And then you gotta catch them so they don't hurt themselves, kind of a thing. Right, look what I can do. You know that doesn't ever really go away. Have you ever applied for a job and you put all the things that you can do on a resume and then you hand it to the person who might hire you and you say, look what I can do. It's the same thing. It's just got big boy pants on now, right? It's the same thing. There's a desire that humans have to meet a test and then overcome that test and say, I did it. Right? So Jesus is being tested here out in the desert and he's going to prove himself good. And these tests are things that humans have faced. And we need to go up against things where we're like, I'm not sure if I can do this. I'm not sure if I can handle this, but I'm going to put myself to the test. And then you like pass the test and you're like, I did it. And that builds confidence inside of you. And you're like, look, well, I did that one thing. And then that kind of builds and builds and builds and builds. And it's like, well, of course I can handle this next thing because I did that one thing way back in the day. And yeah, that's easy now. It was hard then, but it's easy now. You can see how you develop as a person. You're like, look what I can do. I've done these things. And we need the confidence that comes from passing the test. Jesus is having a test here. This is a desire to prove ourselves. It builds confidence. But there is the temptation here to prove ourselves at another person's expense that will then build pride instead of confidence. If you have to degrade someone else to show how great you are, which I'm sure you've experienced that, someone doing that to you, then that builds pride in someone. Because it's not, look what I can do, it's, look, I'm better than so-and-so. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know that feels like really degrading and harmful. You're like, oh, I don't like that feeling. But that's the temptation that Jesus is now facing here. It's like, look what I can do. Now, there's this person in this passage called the devil. And the devil in the stories of Scripture has an evolution of who they think this person is. And it changes all the way back from Old Testament. It's someone who sat in God's courts and was kind of like a little stinker and is like, yeah, we should probably test that person. But was like a person. And then it kind of evolved over time, over 1,000 years or so, and finally gets to this place here. Who is this person called the devil? Like, who is it? What are they like? I don't know, but we all know it. You ever have that like struggle between good and evil inside of you? You're like, I could, but I want to do this. It's one of my favorites. I'm in the Simpsons mode right now. The devil is the personification of the spirit of the age, or also called the zeitgeist, separating out temptation and evil from God's character of goodness and love. That's what refining this character in the New Testament does. Because if you ever read the Old Testament, there's some weird stuff that God does in there. Like, God is like looking at, I think it was King Saul, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to send an evil spirit to torment this guy for a while. And sends an evil spirit. Or God does like bad things in the Old Testament that calls for like, you know, wars and genocides and all this other stuff. As human brains evolved and like got better at thinking about morality and ethics and God, the New Testament writer says we have to like separate out that character from God, because that stuff isn't a part of God's goodness and God's love. Because we know God to be like, so if you ever read stuff in the Old Testament, you're like, why would God do that? Well, God is actually evolving in these texts as well, until we get to the perfect revelation of God in the person of Christ. And so this exiting out this person called the Satan. That's literally what he's called, the Satan. We put a capital in front of it and kind of personified it even more. But the Satan is an attempt to really define God as goodness and love. And we need to take all that stuff that was in the Old Testament. It was like, we got to separate that out. That's a different thing altogether. So that's what this moment is. Now the three perennial temptations, stones the bread, and kingdoms of the world, and the pinnacle of the temple is how we kind of sum things up. And I like Henry Nouwen. He says this: that's the temptation to be relevant, the temptation to be powerful, and the temptation to be spectacular. Now, I'm sure we've felt all those temptations before in our life. Can you imagine, like, in this culture where you have to grow enough food so you don't die? Like we just go to Walmart and grab something, or Kroger, or the store at the corner. We go and buy our food. We exchange our time for money, and then we exchange money for food. That really didn't exist back then. They had little markets here and there to buy things that you couldn't do on your own, but you were pretty much reliant on growing your own food. It was an agricultural society. We're an industrial, technological, we've gone through a lot of things. This was agricultural. So can you imagine being able to take something as common as stones and turn it into food? How popular you would get. Like this is the equivalent of the Midas touch. You remember that story of King Midas when you were a kid? Everything he touched turned to gold. He's like, oh, this is great. Everything I touch, I get more power. I get richer. I get great. This is wonderful. It's the Midas touch. But back in those days, people are like, what am I going to do with a hunk of gold? Like, I can't eat this. I need food. So this is the equivalent of Jesus saying, the devil saying to him, like, why don't you get the Midas touch here? Why don't you turn that stone into bread? You'd be the most popular guy in the world at this point. Turning stones to bread in an agrarian culture would have been as useful as turning stones to gold in the modern culture. Like, whoa, that's a different way to look at things. Turning stones to bread is not just about, oh, you're hungry? You could probably do something about that. You could probably, change that stone into a bread and eat it up and you'd be good. This would be Jesus claiming something in a wrong way, to be relevant, to have people look at him and say, wow, you know that guy? You got to go visit that guy because he can just change everything to bread. Now, did Jesus ever multiply bread and hand it out? He did, but he did it in the right way. Remember the story of the loaves and the fishes? Multiplying things? So this is a temptation to do it the wrong way, to seize and to grab and say, I am great and powerful and relevant and wonderful, and now I'm going to prove it to everybody. Instead, the story of Jesus, multiplying bread and fishes is him doing it the correct way. So there's a lot of text on this one. But when our value as a person is wrapped up in what we can deliver or produce to be relevant to those around us, we never actually arrive at contentment, because peace is always one achievement away. Always one achievement away. When we understand that we don't live on bread alone, we find contentment as the solid ground to stand on. And our activity in the world is not to earn something constantly out of reach, but giving away that which we already possess. And the paradox is we become relevant indirectly by renouncing its pursuit. You might want to just screenshot that one, because that's a lot of words. But I couldn't not say them all, because that's really what this is about. Our hunger, desire to prove ourselves to the world. That desire to pursue at all costs. Like, I got to prove myself, I got to prove myself, I got to prove myself. If it comes from that place of insecurity, you never get there. You never land there. Because it's always going to, once you get that thing that you were after, you're like, well, it's not as good as I thought it was. But the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and it's never here. But if you learn contentment of who you are and what you're capable of, and then you just give away that from that place of contentment, you become a lot more relevant. And I'm sure you've experienced this in that the ego-driven boss, like that manager that's always vying for the never share credit and all that kind of stuff. That there, always one step away, always needing to prove themselves, always needing to at someone else's expense. And Jesus here says, no, we don't actually live on bread alone. There's a lot more to life than just that. So the second one is interesting. And Luke and Matthew switch these two. They switch the order, kingdoms and the pinnacle of the temple. So this one is the kingdoms. Satan says, and the devil led him up and showed him an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, to you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been given over to me, and I will give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours. And Jesus says, it's written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Now this one's interesting. All the kingdoms of the world. I'll hand that over to you. If I remember correctly, at the end of the gospel after Jesus resurrects, he says, all authority has been given to me, right? All authority, and now I'm sending you out. So he gets there eventually. But this is the cheater shortcut version. The Satan is saying, you don't really got to go through all that hard stuff and death and crucifixion and self-sacrificing love. You could just grasp it now. I'll give it to you. You just gotta sell your soul out for a little bit, and get the thing, and then you can use it for good. And it'll be great. And Jesus says, we're not gonna do it that way. He does it the correct way and then gets it in the return later on in the story. There was a guy who owned a lot of money. His name was J.D. Rockefeller. And he said, how much money is enough? Just a little bit more, right? We're never going to get there. If we think always I'll get there eventually. The temptation of power is driven by the natural desire for security. So we end up in the rat race, not trying to fix the problems we face, but to have enough money that they no longer affect us. This is the problem with human beings, is we don't want to fix the problems that we're facing as a human culture. We just want to have enough power and money and influence so that they don't affect me. And then they just affect the people over there. That's the big temptation. It's not to fix things and make things better, but to gather enough resources so that I don't feel them. That's the big temptation. Henry Nouwen, he's one of my favorite people. He says, power always lusts after greater power, precisely because it is an illusion. Despite our experience that power does not give us the sense of security we desire, but instead reveals our own weaknesses and limitations. We continue to make ourselves believe that more power will eventually fulfill our needs. And it doesn't ever happen. The lust for power creeps in through the doorway of good intentions, though. You can just grab this thing and then use it for good. Get it the wrong way. Get it the fast way. Don't get it with the self-sacrificial, loving way that Jesus is going to model. Just grab it now, and then you'll be all good. Then you can use it for good on the other side. You'll just have it a lot sooner and earlier. And as one of my favorite theologians of all time, Gandalf, said, he says, the way of the ring to my heart is by pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me, I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe and unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. Gandalf, and if you don't know Lord of the Rings, you can go home and watch it today. That could be your Lent practice. I'm going to take on all 3 Lord of the Rings movies. It's a great illustration of the temptation of power, to kind of grasp for it and rule the whole world with it. And Gandalf, the great wizard, he's like, oh, don't tempt me with power. I would want to do good with it, but it would just turn on me, and it wouldn't be good. So, what better person to have all authority than Jesus, right? How is this bad? Wouldn't it be great if Jesus just had all authority right there, grasped it, and then fixed everything that's wrong with the world? But that's not how it would work, because how you get something determines who you are when you have it, because it's going to shape you. The grasping, the seeking, the getting. And Christ refuses the shortcut through humility to victory and bypass death to resurrection. He refuses that pathway. And he says, no, the getting is the shaping. How you get something shapes you into the person who then has it. And if you use the cheater way and the shortcut way and the demeaning way, then you're going to be a person who cheats and shortcuts and demeans when you have the thing that you were after. And then you will use it then with those tools that you learned how to do. And so having power is not bad, but how you got the power might be bad. If you had to cheat and scrape and scrunch and get there and then you grab it, now I got it, now I can do some good with it, but you didn't learn how to do good on the way to getting the thing, and now you're using the tools that you crafted on the way of cheating and all this stuff, and now you're wielding it in a bad way. Because how you get something shapes you into the person who has that thing. And Jesus says, I refuse to do it that way. And now the final one, he takes him up to this pinnacle of the temple. And he's like, jump off. I believe I can fly. As the great theologian said. So he takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple and said, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot against a stone. And Jesus answered him, it is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. When the devil had finished every test, he departed him until an opportune time. Now the interesting thing here, there's the pinnacle of the temple. This is like a remake. That's pretty high up there. It's not just, hey, why don't you go up to this really high spot on this cool building and throw yourself down and do a cool parlor trick and have angels come and catch you. This is a very strategic place. And there's a thing that's written about this. It's right here. The Jewish temple was the largest religious structure anywhere in the entire Roman Empire. This is a big deal. And on the south end of the temple, this is a historian, on the south end of the temple was an expansive plaza that bordered the main road through Jerusalem and was a gathering place for thousands of Jews. Directly above it, this meeting point of the plaza and road was the pinnacle of the temple. The pinnacle was a platform at the top of the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. This is the location where at regular intervals each day, a Jewish priest would blow a loud horn to capture everyone's attention in the city to remind them to engage in prayer. This place of trumpeting was a very visual, very public, very well-known and significant place for marking the religious rhythms of the spiritual life of the Jews. Really long quote from Dr. Taylor Alverson, but that's what that place was for. It wasn't just a random spot. He put him there for a specific reason, because there's things that you do here. Now, one of the expectations of the Messiah when he showed up was this one here. And the hour when King Messiah comes, he stands upon the roof of the sanctuary, or pinnacle of the temple, and proclaims to Israel, saying, "You poor, the time of your redemption draws near, and if you believe, rejoice in my light, which is risen upon you. They shall come and lick the dust from under the feet of the King Messiah, and all shall come and fall on their faces before Messiah and before Israel, and say, we will be servants to him and to Israel, and everyone in Israel shall have 2,800 servants." This was the place where the Messiah was supposed to declare himself. This was the expectation the people had of what that moment would be like. So the devil takes Jesus, he's like, tell everyone that you're the guy. And then everyone's going to come and bow before you, and then everyone's going to come, and then the whole world will be your servants and your slaves. And you'll be like the top dogs of the whole world. It'll be great. All you got to do is stand here and make the announcement. And not just make the announcement, but prove it by jumping off and showing us what you can do. Showing us that God's on your side. Showing you that God favors you over those other people over there. And then everyone will believe in you. And then you can rally together and then go to war and conquer everything, and it'll be great. And Jesus says, I'm not going to do that. That's the pinnacle of the temple. That's what it was for. It was for the Messiah was going to announce it's time. And so many would consider relevance, popularity, and power as key ingredients of an effective leadership person, right? They are in reality not vocations, but temptations. These are the things that Jesus is showing us. That if we really want to be effective people of faith in this world, we cannot be grasping for power. We cannot be grasping for relevance and grasping for popularity. These things are the temptations that we all face. And Jesus says, I myself am tempted with these things, and I reject them. And we are followers of Jesus. And we are not going to claim those things for ourselves either. We're not going to bypass the hard things in life to try and get somewhere else. Because we know, as was spoken over Christ at his baptism right before this moment, Christ says, you are my beloved, I am well pleased in you. That moment there is what fueled Christ through these three temptations. Knowing that there wasn't really anything he had to do to prove himself to God. And so, what if, for Lent, we gave up those pursuits of power and relevance and popularity and all that kind of stuff, and we just went from a more centered place? We came at it from a more humble place. So what if we are the beloved of God already? And with nothing to prove, nothing to earn? And what if our actions flowed from that place of deeper belonging and belovedness? Because when they do, they align with Christ's intention and means and ends in this world. So what if you just are the beloved already? You don't have to prove anything to God. You don't have to earn anything from God. You don't have to, there's nothing to do. Like, you're good. What would you do if you're already good and you didn't have anything to prove? And you weren't being driven from that place, if I can just prove myself, if I can just achieve these things, if I can just... I'm sure you'd go a lot farther if you acted from that place of belovedness, acted from that place of belongingness. Your actions would be centered, your actions would be sure, your actions would be very, very profound in this world. Because if we're just another person trying to prove ourselves in the world, gosh, everybody's trying to do that. What if you don't have anything to prove and nothing to earn? And your actions can come from the place of belovedness and belonging. I think that is what Lent is all about. So, reflection question to think about. What do I want to prove to the world? And why do I want to prove it? That's a good Lent question. Thinking about that. And here's a spiritual practice that you can try. Manufacture hunger through subtraction or addition and reflect on what the hunger reveals. Manufacture hunger through subtraction or addition and reflect upon what that hunger reveals about you. Well, our benediction is a poem, not from the Psalms this time, but from Malcolm Guite. He wrote a whole Lent series, and I thought this one was very applicable. So here's the deal, and this is what you get. This is Satan's words to Jesus. The penthouse suite with world-commanding views, the banker's bonus and the private jet, control and ownership of all the news, and into that exclusive 1%, you who know the score. You know the score, who really run the show with interest on every penny lent and sweeteners for cronies in the know. A straight arrangement between me and you, no hell below, no high heaven above. You just admit it and give me my due and wake up from this foolish dream of love. Satan's words to Jesus. Jesus' response, but Jesus laughed. You are not what you seem. Love is the waking life. You are the dream. That was All the Kingdoms of the World by Malcolm Guite, written years ago. Amen.